Alright, so this is going to be the first attempt of running you through a PowerPoint. And I've lost my trail of thought already. Wow, this is going to go really well. This is going to be the first attempt at running you through a PowerPoint for the information that you'll need for the assignment. I
Is
appreciate
this Unit 4 assignment?
this is
Part
Unit
B?
4, Part B. Yes.
Oh,
I will do this in two parts. I'll first run you through the PowerPoint, and then I'll run you through the assignment brief and what I expect you to do for each part.
okay.
I'm going to put everyone on mute, and we'll have a walkie-talkies type situation. So if you'd like to ask something or contribute, or when I ask for you guys to give me ideas, please unmute yourself and
Okay.
chime in. Okay. Biology and environment, part B. This is all about how we have messed up the environment. And Kian, what are you doing unmuting yourself? There you go. Nice try. I apologise if you're about to ask me something, actually. Are you? No. Okay. This is all about how we've messed up our environment, naughty humans, and what we're doing to try to mitigate the damage and reverse the damage, so to speak. I appreciate that some of you know this already, and therefore you'll be able to help me out with examples and suggestions, but this is sort of for future reference for you to be able to how do I say it? If you're improving upon your assignment, you now have a reference for all the information you need. Impacts of humans. Deforestation. This can be done by making roads, clearing land for houses, for farms, for different resources such as mining, exploration, for resources such as wood. We use wood a lot for building things. We need to chop down trees to do that. Does anybody have any other reasons that they think we would chop down trees for?
Paper.
Paper's a good one. I had that. Thank you. Nice. Okay. Pollution, CO2, plastic, acid rain, I guess general waste. CO2 can be caused by burning fossil fuels, largely. Plastic pollution, I mean, you know where the plastics come from. They go into the ocean, they go into landfill sites, they go into our forests, onto our streets. There's a pigeon that almost flew into my window. Don't worry about that. Just scared me for a moment. These do not degrade very rapidly, unfortunately, and will stick around for thousands of years. They'll trap little sea critters in them. They'll essentially die. That's not really fun. Plastics are known to cause health issues such as cancers. Have you heard of BPA? It's a type of plastic. It's not great for our health. And if you're going to get drinking water or have a water bottle, try to get one that has BPA-free plastic. Acid rain, that's not a good one. That's caused by sulfur dioxide, which is another what would I call it? Greenhouse gas. But when it collects in the air, when it falls back down, it's essentially sort of sulfuric acid. Now this doesn't have a huge effect on, say, us, because our skin's pretty tough, but it erodes away buildings and it will kill small microorganisms and impact trees and stuff. It's sort of a long-term negative consequence of it. Hunting, I'd consider this a big effect on the environment. I mean, ecosystems are environments, and if we kill all the dodos, we've got no more dodos. They're bit of a tangent time, but it's quite relevant. There was an island, can't remember where the island is, but there was this small little bird that had no natural predators, so was really friendly. And so people could literally walk up to this little bird, pick them up in their hand, and the bird would be like, "Whoa, what's going on? This is an unusual situation," but it was completely chill because it's never known anything to be aggressive to it. And so people literally pick them up and put them in a pot to cook. And now we've got no more of those birds, which is sad. That has a consequence of then upsetting an ecosystem, and so maybe the things that the birds used to eat, like a little insect, which was kept under control by the birds, now goes rampant and wild. And then let's say it was a locust or something, then there's locust plagues because the birds aren't eating them, and the locust plagues eat all of our food, and then we starve because we've got no food, because the locusts ate it, because we ate the bird things that ate the locusts. So it's a little bit of an irony, but yeah, okay, I need to stop tangenting. Resources. So we need things such as metals and rare minerals to create microchips and that sort of thing. The mines are ridiculously polluting. They destroy ecosystems because it's a big old hole in the ground. They use ridiculous amounts of waters. So you've heard of fracking, right? Well, fracking is by pumping hyper-speed jets of water into the ground to break up the stone into mush. That water is now no longer drinkable, which is another consequence. We'll go into that later. But and I guess that water then pollutes, so I guess it is kind of related. But then you've got unstable ground as well. In terms of farming, why did I put farming, land and water? Not sure why I put farming, land and water, but in terms of just general farming, we clear a lot of land to create the farms. This is both for meat and crops. We drain the soil of all of its nutrients. That's why we need to replenish it with fertilizers, but fertilizers aren't ideal because the soil is more than just nutrients. Soil is made up of about 30% mushroom and fungus. So just by you can't replace the mushroom and fungus that is in the soil very easily, and by draining all the resources from it, because you're growing, I don't know, think of a crop, wheat, it's an easy one, because you're draining all the nutrients from the ground because you're growing wheat, it damages the ecosystem within the soil. Bit of a tangent time. We know more about space than we know about the bottom of the ocean and the ocean. Oh, hello Nick and Nyla. Fantastic. I am recording this so you will be able to watch it again at another point. Where was I? Yeah, we know more about space than we know about the oceans, and specifically the bottom of the oceans, and we know more about the bottom of the ocean than we do about what's in our soil, to put it in perspective of how clueless we are about the soil. And so do you think we'll be able to adequately keep it healthy if we have no understanding of what's going on with it? The answer is most likely no. Can anybody else think of any resources that might harm the environment that we need? Good morning, Fee. Didn't see you there.
Sorry, what was the question?
Can you think of any other resources of the world that we need that has an effect on the environment from taking it?
Oh,
Coal?
Coal? Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's
Oil and gas.
that's sort of, I guess, part of mining. The oil, the gas, yeah, oil spills, they're not great. They're really not fun. I've told you about the mushroom that eats oil, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice, okay. Desertification. So,
that's when a soldier stops going to the army.
very, very funny, yeah. Or when the world becomes a little more diabetic.
Oh,
So, desertification is when the land becomes essentially barren, dry, all used up of all its nutrients, resources, and essentially becomes not very fertile anymore. Think of any desert. This includes the North and South Poles, which are also classified as deserts. These are classified as the salt flats in Africa, where it's just flat and salty ground. Nothing can live there. These are growing because we're running out of water, because we're chopping down trees. Forests, and I'll go into this a bit more later, are far more complex than just trees. Trees are just part of it, and therefore just planting trees to replace the ones you cut down isn't really I mean, it's something, but it's not very effective. To put this in perspective, the Gobi Desert, is it the Gobi Desert? No, Gobi is a berry. The Gobi Desert near China is growing by about 3,000 or 4,000 square kilometers every single year. That's a lot. The Sahara Desert is it's getting bigger. Let's just put it that way. Final one that I can think of off the top of my head is invasive species. This is an impact that humans are having. Australia, let's use that as a great example. We took foxes over to Australia. Bad idea, because foxes have no natural predators in Australia. So therefore they became an apex predator, and a very intelligent one, and one that screams at night. And therefore it started killing all the wildlife, minus, say, the larger animals such as kangaroos. There was crops that were trying to grow in Australia that were being attacked by this bug. So we decided to bring in cane toads to get rid of the bug, not realizing that the cane toad doesn't eat the bug. And now the cane toad is a massive problem in Australia, as in a ridiculous problem, because nothing eats it because it's poisonous. So that was real smart of them, and it destroys a lot of the insect population, and that's sort of the bottom of the food chain. So we invited a species into Australia that can't be eaten because it's poisonous and eats all the food for all the other animals, and then also introduced a apex predator that eats all the animals as well. So Australia, for a long time, I think they still got it, is a rule: if you come across a cane toad or a fox, you're allowed to kill it. Which is kind of brutal, but it might be the lesser of two evils. Can anybody else think of any examples of impacts that people have on the environment? Remember, you will have to unmute yourself, but maybe not. Nice. Okay. The spelling of sulfur annoyed me, so tangent time. It changed when I went through education. So sulfur was always spelt with a PH as I was growing up, and then about the time I was doing chemistry A level, they decided no, it's always going to be an F now. And being dyslexic, my brain was just like, no, you can't change words that I've learnt. That's not fair. That's not fair. I've just got my head around the PH means an F thing, and you've gone and changed it. Anyway, living indicators. So how do we know what damage has been done? Well, we can look into living and non-living indicators. Living indicators such as tree coverage. So we can see this from, well, if you get up on a vantage point, but also from satellite imagery. If there's not many trees, you can probably, or the change in tree levels, you could probably use that as an indicator of deforestation or desertification. Lichens. Lichens are, or lichens, not, you know what I'm talking about. Lichens are the little sort of mini moss things you get on stone, the little decoloration circles you get on stone that it isn't moss. I'm not going to show you a picture of them just yet, but I might put one on when I'm uploading this PowerPoint. These are sensitive to sulfur dioxide, which causes acid rain, and so if there's not much of them or a reducing number of them, you can probably assume that there's an increase in greenhouse gases, specifically sulfur dioxide. The mayfly, it has a little larva, so the little maggot version of the mayfly is really sensitive to oxygen levels in the water, and so more mayfly larvae means more oxygen, which means less pollution. And this happens because if you put sewage and that sort of thing into water, it acts as a fertilizer essentially for the plants or the algae in the water, and these, or was it the opposite? I think it's the opposite, my bad. If you put pollution into the water, it can prevent the growth of algae and kill off some of the plant species in it. If it kills off the plant species in it, the plant species no longer produce the oxygen that goes into the water. Therefore, there's a reduction in the oxygen levels in the water. Therefore, there's a reduction in the levels of mayflies. So if you go over to a lake where there's mayflies and loads of bugs being about, you could probably assume that it's a healthy environment. Really strange. I think I had a dream last night where there were just loads of bugs about. Strange.
That means you're irritated by something.
I dreamt about kebab, so I don't know what that means.
It means you're hungry, man. Animal population generally is a sign of a healthy ecosystem. So if you've got fewer bumblebees, there's probably more pollutants about. If you've got fewer deer about, it could be a suggestion that you were overhunting. It could be a sign of deforestation or an imbalance caused by invasive species, because, well, the forests are the home to a lot of critters. Can anybody think of any other living indicators that I could add to this? Good morning, Jack. No one else? No one? Okay, no worries. I I couldn't think of any more off the top of my head. I'll see if I can do some research into finding some more. Non-living indicators. Measurements and also the use of satellite imagery. So you can see CO2 levels, measure CO2 levels. These are a great indicator of how much greenhouse gases we produce. We can measure the amount of microplastics in the ocean by taking little samples in different places, or seeing how much is in small animals from the ocean. In terms of satellite imagery, we can... Oh, there's one I thought. But that's, I guess, a living indicator. So we can look at global temperature. That's a sign of global warming, which is also a sign, although not a guaranteed sign, of greenhouse gas increases. We can have a look at ice cover via satellite imagery, sea level rise. These are all non-living things that are indicating of sort of environmental impact. Erosion, sign of acid rain, and also deforestation. So what I mean by this is there's two types of erosion in terms of like stone buildings or monuments, or you can see them being sort of worn away and become more smooth, and also erosion in terms of landslides and that sort of thing. If there's no trees about, there's nothing holding the ground together, and it can erode and fall away. I thought of something. What was I thinking of? Can anybody else think of any other non-living indicators whilst I try to think of the example I just thought of? No? No one? Nice. No problem. When I think of it, I'll add it. Methods to reduce impact, and this is one where I hope you'll be able to give me some examples. Electric cars or vehicles to replace petrol cars and vehicles. The big positive from this is it uses less CO2. However, the minerals used for the batteries in electric cars are pretty toxic to the environment. And the process of extracting them from the ground is quite a polluting process. The CO2 is still produced in generating electricity. It was done with fossil fuels, which most of our electricity is produced this way. It's more efficient, so technically we're using less CO2, but we're still using it. Speaking of that, we're adding electric cars, sure, but we're not removing the petrol cars. So we're still producing that environmental impact, even though we're sort of reducing the future increase. That might not be enough, because we're already producing way too much. So sure, reducing the future increase is good, but we need to essentially reduce what we're doing right now. That little thought process that I just did there was sort of the distinction part of this assignment. Can anybody else think of any pros or cons with that? No worries. Eat less meat. So a lot of land is used for animals that we consume. That land could have been a forest instead, which would have absorbed CO2. A lot of cattle produce a lot of methane. Methane is about, I think it's 100 or 1,000 times more destructive as a greenhouse gas than CO2, so it's a pretty bad one. Tangent time, we can prevent that by changing the diet in the cows, so they no longer produce methane. But of course, why would we do that? That's expensive. Another pro of it is less deforestation, because we're not clearing land for the cattle, we're not clearing land for the crops that feed the cattle. It's not just cattle, there's other animals, but this is the big one that affects the planet. Con of this is that if we're no longer, and of course this might be a sensitive topic for any vegans or vegetarians that are in this conversation, but please understand that I've thought this through very thoroughly, and I often go through vegan periods of my life, so I'm not trying to antagonize anybody when I said this. Plant life still requires land space, so sure, we will no longer use the land for animals, but we will use the land for plants to feed us. This is a reduced amount of land, sure, but it's still land used. And furthermore, it's more difficult to feed the planet on a plant-based diet, because it's not as nutrient dense. Therefore, it is possible, but it's more difficult, and so it could be a con. I'm just trying to keep things roughly balanced.
Andy?
For your assignment. Yes, Michael.
Did you mean that the planet eats meat? I got a bit confused there.
So our consumption of meat affects the environment in the sense of deforestation and greenhouse gas production, in the sense of cattle produces methane, and the deforestation reduces the planet's ability to absorb CO2. So the planet doesn't eat meat, but we eat meat, and the fact that we eat meat affects the planet.
Yeah, I get it.
No worries. Can anybody think of any other example of a pro or con of eating less meat when it comes to environmental impact? No problem. Recycling plastics. Pro, less plastic waste. It's pretty obvious. Less CO2 generated from producing plastics. Also, I guess less damage to
I've got a pro.
A pro, yes.
Like less animals are killed because like single-use plastic
That's a good one.
will be like the only thing kind of in there if we keep recycling.
That's a fantastic one. Am I missing something here? Why can't I insert?
You got to. I think it's select table. Oh, yeah.
There you go up there, yeah.
Table.
It's just inserting another one. It's fine. I'll just insert another one. I'll figure it out later.
Do you not remember what I said?
Sort of along those lines?
Yeah.
Yeah, Nice. Yeah, save the turtles and all that. Yes, hello. Did someone say something? No? Ooh, just going mad. It's fine. Nice.
Very thanks.
Yeah. A big con of this is that recycling doesn't actually remove the plastic from the planet that's already polluting there. It just reduces...
It just like reuses it.
Yeah, it reduces the amount of future pollution.
It stops you introducing more. It stops you introducing more
Yeah.
than there already is.
Yes. But we've already got pollution, so it doesn't actually reduce the impact that's already been caused by it. Plant trees replace the trees that are lost. These absorb CO2, reduces greenhouse effect and global warming, or climate change is a better word for it. But the con, which I've already explained before, is that forests are a lot more complex than just planting trees. They have slowly grown in a delicate system over thousands of years, and some forests in the world over millions of years. I think there's a forest in northern Australia which is, I don't know, 15, 20 million years old, something like that. Just planting more trees doesn't replace the forest.
Also, it takes time.
It takes time, yeah. So put this in
I've got a pro though. I've got a pro
Yeah.
for it. It can restore wildlife, because like if they were like somewhere to go, then they're gonna go back there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So a little bit of a tangent, but relevant. An oak tree that's, let's say, the size of you, so I don't know, between 5 and 6 feet tall, is probably about 15, 16 years old. An oak tree which is, let's say, 5 meters tall is probably about 300 or 400 years old. It takes an hour to chop down an oak tree, but it takes about 300-400 years for that oak tree to grow back. And also, there's a really interesting book that I'd recommend anyone who's interested in this sort of thing to read, called The Secret Life of Trees, and it's all talking about how forests have a symbiotic relationship. So one tree will send nutrients to another tree. It'll send chemical messages through the funguses in the soil. It will essentially, the whole system will regulate how many deer are allowed to live essentially within it, to graze on the grass within the forest. It's a impossibly beautifully complex system, and just planting a load of one type of tree in an area creates a sort of Frankenstein monster kind of replacement, and we don't know the consequences of that just yet, but it's better than nothing. It's better than nothing. It prevents desertification, because you've actually got living stuff there, but it's not ideal. Ideal is don't chop down the forests. Using alternative fuels. Pro, less CO2. Cons, requires a lot of money to set up. Solar panels produce quite a lot of pollution in terms of mining the rare earth materials and minerals that are required to make it. And nuclear energy can be pretty bad if it goes wrong. I mean, we're not going to be able to repopulate Chernobyl for at least another 15 16,000 years kind of bad. Can anybody think of any other ways we could reduce the impact or correct the impact that we've caused the environment?
Reduce what do you call them? Factories and companies using non-renewable resources. I don't know. I guess that's less CO2, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, and I can convert it into something. So, political restrictions.
Yeah, because the big companies, it's like throwing away cigarettes. Like the cigarette companies, they're not really held responsible for their part of ruining the environment.
You could put a congestion charge more on heavy populated places rather than just London, because if someone doesn't want to pay, then they'd probably take public transport or ride a bike or something rather than drive.
Yeah, definitely. Following on from that point, actually having a decent public transport system in this country. I'm looking at you, Southern Rail. These are sort of just ways to enforce it. I'm sure you can think of other political restrictions. So, for example, you could... Oh, green zones. Have you heard of green zones? Or green belts?
See.
Yes.
So, areas in which you're not allowed to chop down trees or do any building. You can protect... You can... Oh! Listed trees. So what I mean,
Andy.
Yep.
Sorry, is this going to be somewhere? Because I keep screenshotting it.
Yeah, I'm going to upload this video of this whole conversation and PowerPoint run through.
Okay, no worries.
I'll do that either this afternoon or this evening. I've just downloaded some video editing software to make it a bit more seamless for me.
Alright, so I don't have to screenshot.
No, you don't. I'll also upload this PowerPoint as well for your use. What I mean by listed trees is that environments are sort of similar to the green belt, green zones of places, green areas that you're not allowed to do any building on. Listed trees are specifically protected trees that you're not allowed to touch, essentially. When I was at university, there was a opportunity for us to have a awesome mansion house that was quite far away from university, but it would have been sick anyway. And in that property they had a grade 2 listed tree, which is like a really old tree that has, you're just not allowed to do anything to it. Okay, whoops, deleted the wrong one. Okay, moving on to more of the merit and distinction sort of area, the analysis of the effects. So, just to say, this whole PowerPoint is essentially 80-90% of what you need for the assignment, but I also expect you to do a bit of research and go into a bit more detail than I've gone in today with you. So the analysis of the effects is a sort of a deeper look into what the effects are, what they cause, and how significant these effects are. So, for example, CO2 pollution causes global warming. That would be sort of a description of the effect. And the more the analysis, you could name them the multiple consequences that come from that, and increased atmospheric temperature, which is caused by the blanketing effect of the greenhouse effect. This then will go into sea level rises, or makes it more likely that forests catch alight, and then this destroys habitats and environments, or floods habitats and environments. These are super significant because there's mass death that you can't easily recover from. You can't reverse the effects of the greenhouse gas as easily as, say, acid rain, where it's just prevent sulfur production, essentially. It has a bit of a time lag, it has a bit of a delay to it. Another example of how you could talk about this is hunting reduces the population of a species. That would be sort of the description of the effect on the environment. The consequence of this would be potentially an extinction of the species, which then can turn into an imbalance of the food chain. Think of the sort of the little bird and the locust example, and then this could cause say the locust to eat all your food, or let's say the foxes in Australia to here's a good example. We used to have wolves in the UK, and then we killed them all because wolves used to eat our children and our civilians, that sort of thing, so it was pretty bad. However, now that we've killed the wolves, the deer have no natural predator, so they are going crazy with the breeding and the eating.
And they're running into the road.
And they're running into the road, and they're eating all the flowers, and they're eating a lot of the grass, and so much so that there's now an entire industry based upon it called venison, and specifically wild venison. And it's the meat that I eat. I'm trying to eat a lot of, because essentially it's population control of the deer, because there's too many of them and they're causing environmental damage, and we have to get rid of them because there's no natural predator for them. So they get professional hunters to clean them out, and these are deer that weren't bred for consumption, so they're not in the farming environment, which I think causes a lot of psychological stress on anything. So they've lived a happy natural life, and then suddenly they're dead.
Boom.
So I think it's probably the most ethically sound
Meat to eat.
In the sense that it's literally not. They're not being. They're not there to be eaten. Essentially, they're not part of the farming system, and they're wild and they're organic, and it's just. It's a farm. It's like, we can't have 1,000 deer just knocking about eating everything. It's unsustainable. It's almost like the reverse. Well, think of it like the bunny and the locust system, but bigger. The locusts are now deer, and the bunny used to be wolves. Not the bunny, the bird. Oh, I'm struggling. So the analysis is looking into a sort of a deeper look into how it can affect the environment and what the consequences are. Oh, speaking of this, so the significance of this is pretty high, but not as high as, say, the CO2 production, because the CO2 production can cause mass extinction that you can't recover from, whereas the hunting can cause localized extinction that you might be able to recover from. So it's analyzing how big of an impact this has on the environment. Evaluation. This is the distinction part. Evaluation is weighing up the pros and the cons, evaluating them, and sort of giving an assessment or a judgment after the fact after the after you have weighed up the pros and the cons in a sense.
I put in the habitat like protection program for that.
Yeah, that's a good one. What are the cons of a habitat protection program? Or where's the limitation with it? As in, to what extent can it actually help?
No, I couldn't think of any for that one.
Okay.
I tried researching it and
That's fine.
couldn't find it.
For much of the distinction thing, you won't be able to research it. You just have to think it through. Let's go with the habitat protection society or whatever it was. They are there to probably prevent green zones from being demolished, from forests from being chopped down, that sort of thing. These are fantastic in the sense of you reduce the deforestation, that improves CO2 absorption from the planet, so you can talk about the CO2 effect, you can talk about the wildlife, the fact they've still got homes. However, the limitation of that is that there aren't enough resources to protect all the green places. Another limitation of that is that the Habitat Protection Society has not been able to save Australia from all the forest fires. That's a good one. And so they're making a good impact. However, the amount of land that they're saving from destruction is minuscule in comparison to the amount of land that's being destroyed, or the habitats being destroyed anyway. So it's a lovely idea, but the impact is not maybe big enough for it to be significant or effective. And then you can talk about a more effective way of, say, government bans on chopping down wood in the Amazon rainforest would be a far more effective way of doing what the environmental protection people are doing. So that would be a distinction quality evaluation. I'll give you another example that I've written down here that I've actually talked about before is electric cars. So electric cars reduce the amount of CO2 used. However, the electricity is often produced with CO2 producing methods such as fossil fuels, burning fossil fuels, so it doesn't actually remove the CO2 production. It has an additional environmental impact of the batteries are highly polluting in their production and disposal, and the fact that even though we're adding electric cars to the roads, we're not really taking off the petrol and diesel cars, so we're just reducing the future increase rather than reducing our current impact. So you can say that actually in the long term this could be a very effective way to reduce the impact, because of you can insert a figure of how much CO2 is produced by all the cars. So in theory, if we replace them all with electricity, we'll reduce that number significantly. So I would like you to have a look at for some figures. You don't need a lot, but just one or two. And this will be very significant because it's, 10-15% of the CO2 production. However, because we're not really removing them, the petrol and the diesel cars, adding electric cars to the roads don't actually impact the problem very significantly. So it's sort of talking about the pros, the cons, the limits of the pros, the limits of the cons, and a sort of a personal opinion on how significant this is for reducing the impact of the environment. And the final distinction part is the long-term effects of pollutants. You can talk about plastic, the fact that it can trap critters and creatures and strangle them, or they eat it and it poisons them or gives them cancer. The fact that these take thousands, if not tens of thousands of years to degrade, so there's the long-term effect of it. You can talk a lot about the long-term effect of CO2 pollution with global warming. You can find a lot of information on the long-term effects of that, such as sea level rises, death of ecosystems, fires, desertification, making entire countries inhabitable, like Australia or soon to be California. Nuclear waste is a good one. I mean, it's going to take 15 to, it might even be 100,000 years for Chernobyl to relax a little bit. Nuclear disaster could have killed half of Europe. These causes mutations which affect the lineage of a species, which can cause cancer. It can cause genetic defects and health issues, that sort of thing. Long-term effects of acid rain is that the soil becomes devoid of nutrients and trees can't grow from that, and then what happens if trees can't grow from that? It's thinking, what's the pollutant? What issue does it cause? What effects does that issue cause? What consequences happen from that? 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 You get the idea. It's just trying to populate it with as many ideas as possible. And that there is essentially the entirety of Assignment B. Has anybody got any questions or things they'd like to add to this that they've thought? Nice. Alright.